Welcome to the podcast. Navigating a crisis is something all organizations should prepare for in terms of organizational and communications plans. In today's podcast, we discuss how the importance of crisis management in public relations lies in the efforts of crisis communications. It's not only about what you are doing, but how you are choosing to communicate those plans. Let's begin the podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Janice Kleins, Marketing Manager for AOE, and today I have on the podcast Laura Merritt, Account Manager for AOE. Laura is one of our crisis communication specialists on our team, and today we are discussing a recent blog she wrote, What is a Crisis Communication Specialist? Having a crisis plan is something every organization should have in place, and Laura is here to give us more information on this topic. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks, Janice. I appreciate being here.
Well, we're glad you're here. So tell our audience what crisis management is and what it means to be crisis ready.
Yeah, sure. Crisis management is simply the process an organization goes through in an emergency situation. And navigating a crisis is something that all organizations should be prepared for. So you need to have a plan in place, but it goes beyond that. It's also the ability for a designated crisis team within your organization to work together and communicate effectively and quickly. And it's not only about what you're doing, but how you're choosing to communicate those plans. Crisis communication should include responding to comments on social media, crafting an e-blast to go out to clients, preparing a statement for a press conference, and don't forget your employees. You need to be communicating with them as well. And it continues once the crisis is over. That could be revising the employee handbook to include updated procedures and expectations, or following up with your employees, clients, communities, and media.
Okay. So what is a crisis communication specialist?
A crisis communication specialist is a dedicated team member who will manage all documentation and communications related to that crisis. And that ensures continuity across all the platforms, and they provide follow-ups to any inquiries that are received. And this can be from the community, it can be from employees, it can be from the media. The person should also be providing problem-solving support by directing interested parties to members of the crisis team who can assist them with those specific needs. So whether you choose to outsource a crisis communication specialist or identify someone in-house, the role is essential to supporting your crisis team.
So what skills are required for crisis management?
That's a good question, Janice. Crisis management skills can include we'll start with organizational. As folks are probably aware, crises can be chaotic and often are. You want to have a crisis team that will follow through on a plan and stay organized, stay on track. You also want a team that's thoughtful, well spoken, particularly whomever you designate as the spokesperson. Crisis communications is all about conveying to your various audiences the actions that are being taken, and the words need to be carefully chosen to make sure that you're accurately representing the organization and the information. Honesty and reliability, I think these probably go without saying, and certainly don't need definitions. Multitasking, there are a lot of moving parts in a crisis. You need people who don't mind wearing a few hats during a crisis. Empathy, showing that concern, particularly in a crisis that involves people who have been injured or worse. The way you communicate and how you communicate to those involved parties needs to be sensitive at all times. And then lastly, action-oriented. Response time is really important, and you'll likely have several different folks reaching out to you at different times, wanting more information and wanting it now. So you need to make sure that you have a team that is very focused on those requests for information and stays on track again with that plan.
Okay, so now that we know what's required or what a crisis management looks like, um, what should your crisis team look like? Like who should be on, what are the crisis management team roles and responsibilities, basically?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great question. Your crisis team should be comprised of a diverse group of employees that span across your organization. That typically includes leadership representation, senior communication staff, senior HR representatives. You may need someone from finance, depending on the crisis, uh, department heads, or if you have locations um, spaced out across the country, for example, you would want to have representation from each of those locations. And then lastly, legal representation may be required in some instances. It's really important to understand that having a dedicated team is going to ensure that your organization is able to respond appropriately and in a timely manner. And your teams need to be able to take effective action, as I mentioned earlier, in a crisis, understanding that crises don't often wait until business hours to occur. So they need to be ready, whether it's weekends or evenings. They also need to be able to plan both operating and communication response strategies and to anticipate future crises. And then they need to ensure the flow of reliable information. And that needs to occur between all staff and management, as well as with their external audiences.
Okay. So should your president, CEO, executive director be the spokesperson?
Well, you shouldn't assume that your leadership should be your spokesperson in all cases. You may need someone on a lower level to come in if a correction or clarification is needed, for example. Often reserving the highest official for messages of compassion and concern is the right decision, while a subject matter expert may be more appropriate for sharing the operational details. So, when choosing a spokesperson, for the company. There's things that you need to consider, and that should be their their knowledge. What part of the organization do they represent? Are they the best person to be representing the company in this particular crisis? And again, looking at what the message is. If it is a high level message expressing concern for those impacted, that certainly could be your president, CEO, executive director, etc.
Okay. So now that you have your team assembled, what happens next?
Okay.
Mhm.
First, you need to assemble your team. As you say, it's been assembled. Once you've done that, a few things to keep in mind. Make sure everyone is familiar with the company's values, the mission statement, the culture, those sorts of things. This is really important because all of the messaging that comes from this team and needs to be pushed um, to the internal and external audiences throughout the crisis and even after the crisis. Those messages have to be aligned with your company's culture, with your values, mission statement. If they're not, you're going to have a disconnect. So that's really important that everybody understands those values and mission statement. Consider who's going to craft the messaging. That should be at least one person on the team designated to actually be writing that messaging and making sure everyone who needs that information has it. Um, Consider the assets that are going to be created. That includes a spokesperson's statements. If you are going to hold a press conference, press releases in some cases, internal staff communications, social media posts, and so on. Um, you also need to define the different roles of the team and identify who will hold each role. Uh, it ranges from people who are note taking to people who are, again, speaking to media. So there's a wide range of roles, understanding what those roles are and making sure that you identify who's going to hold that role and have backup as well, because you may have someone as your spokesperson and a crisis happens when they are on vacation, for example. So you need to have a backup in those situations so you always have somebody on hand to jump in when a crisis hits. Also have some sort of media monitoring in place. You want to be paying attention to social media and to traditional media. Is the news reporting on the crisis and what are they saying? And then we recommend that you conduct periodic mock scenarios as a team. And this is where you take a potential crisis that could feasibly occur and impact your organization, and you do a run through. This is how we will handle it as if it were a real crisis. This can be very eye-opening and let you know exactly how prepared your team is and what you need to do to make sure that you are prepared when an actual crisis hits.
That's a great idea. So
Thanks.
what can AOE do to help in regards to crisis communication?
Well, we have decades of experience helping organizations plan for the what if scenarios and creating a culture that ensures successful operations and communication during a crisis. So we have a lot of background there, from crisis strategic planning and issues audits, where we can take a look at an issue. Maybe it didn't even become a full-blown crisis, but it could down the road. We do an audit and we provide, insights that give you a better idea as an organization, what's the likelihood that this could happen to us. We also offer media training and a whole lot more. So, basically AOE can help you with your crisis planning, your preparations, and actually managing in the midst of one, no matter what the issue.
Okay. So thank you, Laura, for taking the time to sit down with me and discuss the importance of having a crisis plan in place and all the stuff that you need to have for a crisis plan. For more information on this blog, please visit our website at aoeteam.com. We also have under our services tab, crisis communication. Feel free to check that out. Thanks, Laura. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Janice.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope this session provides value, and we hope you will join us for our next podcast.